So this is one we focused mostly on the transitions. So we decided to think about it. This is sort of a collaboration project between secondary institutions, post-secondary institutions, and then attracting students to workforce. We decided to focus on those transitions. One interesting question that opened up is like, how far back do you go? I think we had a little bit of discussion on the middle school to high school transition, but even within that, there was some discussion about data points that might be predictive indicators that go back as far as kind of third grade literacy tests and things like that. One thing we pointed on in the phase of sort of middle school to high school, that 6th to 12th grade window, is this is a window when, as a general proposition, we thought that more granular data sets had become available, and that there's a lot of transactional data existing about grades and attendance and social emotional learning and interventions that are provisioned. And so while we think there's a wealth of data that exists because of sort of the decentralized nature of school systems, there's a really inconsistent leveraging of that data, probably in most cases. And so as this project kind of drives towards recommendations, one focus should potentially be on identifying what are the most important things to leverage, because those can go into recommendations that actually affect policy at the district and school level. In the secondary to post-secondary transition, we had kind of a variety of topics that came up. One thing, and this is something I brought up from my personal experience in some previous work, is that in the secondary to post-secondary transition, when you're looking at that transition from the high school side, a lot of the kind of the biggest and best available data sets also have this kind of attrition bias problem. I can look ahead to post-secondary and see kind of which students are there and kind of profile data based on that, but I'm profiling students who do end up enrolled in college, and I might be a little bit blind to students who could have ended up enrolled in college but don't end up in those data sets. Another thing that came up is in thinking about sharing data between secondary and post-secondary institutions, one thing to recognize is that at the college level, a lot of the sort of analogous transactional data that we recognize growing in the 6th to 12th grade actually doesn't exist often at the college and university level. Attendance data, tracking of social emotional learning issues, a lot of that sort of granular data set may not exist or kind of have the analog on the university side, at least most of the time. And that's one of the challenges. It has to do with this sort of the opt-in versus opt-out nature of education when you pass into post-secondary. We also keyed in on some of the important metrics just in terms of what gets tracked in high schools is enrollment, enlisted employment. We kind of identified those three as the outcomes that kind of get tracked from the high school side. And then we also sort of brainstormed out a list of the sort of operational metrics or operational steps that might go into that enrollment that are very specific to the end of high school to the beginning of post-secondary ed. So things like placement exams, housing, financial aid, acceptance, orientation, all these sort of operational steps that sort of form the conveyor belt between high school and college. Any number, all those things might be worth building some infrastructure to kind of track those and understand what they mean. And then just the only kind of point we had on that final transition between college and workforce, and they speak back to the last group's presentation a little bit about profiling the job market. I don't know much about it, but somebody in our group brought up this platform called Burning Glass that scrapes job postings and used that to create sort of a hierarchical profile of the job market. Like what industries, so you could kind of speak to the demand in different industries. I think, was that you, Zan, that brought that up? So that's as much as I would be able to get ready to do it.
It's scraping job.
Burning Glass.
Burning
It's a
Glass.
tech company.
Yeah, it's an analytics company based out of Boston. They scrape something like 34 million job listings a year,
and so you can get near real-time labor market statistics on the degree and major profiles within a metropolitan statistical area, and I think downward. We've done some work with them from a college and university to workforce pipeline perspective, but their stuff is all based off of what demand looks like, not what the pipeline looks like. So there is still a little bit of disconnect and some noise in the outcomes, but it's a very, very smart group, and they're very keen on how they can help colleges and universities leverage their degrees. They have a program specifically built towards helping colleges and universities determine what programs they need to offer within their space and whether or not there are available jobs at graduation for those students. So the example that they give is 5 years ago, data science was a huge productive major for most science and technology universities, but the number of available data science positions had precipitously dropped. So they were graduating students out into a labor market that couldn't support them. Whereas like chief technology office space, like cybersecurity, was blossoming, and we weren't graduating enough cybersecurity specialists. And then they have a program too, and here I am evangelizing about them. They have a program too that writes a taxonomy between different types of jobs. So, for instance, if you're a technical business analyst working in an IT field, you may only need to take 1 or 2 undergraduate courses in order to qualify for a cybersecurity certificate, which then opens up the door to a cybersecurity position. And that certificate program may cost you $12,000, but your jump in salary could be anything between $25,000 and $50,000. So they do a whole host of analytics around the value proposition or your return on investment for education.
Programs?
What's that?
For credentialing or micro-credentialing?
Yeah, credentialing, micro-credentialing, and it's at the consumer level, right? So you can, as an institution, you can leverage that to determine what programs that you should offer, but you can also, as a consumer, leverage that to say, I am here, I'm thinking about going here, what does that labor market look like, and what steps do I need to take in order to get there?
Would they have an interest in working with high schools to figure out?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations that we've had with them is definitely about how can we improve the pipeline, how can we improve the information that flows down. The natural course is to go from workforce to college and university, because most of the job postings in this country that are on LinkedIn, Glassdoor, whatever you want to, Indeed, Ladders, right, are all professionally oriented degrees. We have a lower focus on the CTE focused degrees, at least, that aren't related to either healthcare or IT.
If you all remember, Georgia State was here last year and they'll be coming back again in the spring. They have a very sophisticated, essentially career matching program. Arizona State has a pretty good one. Some of us actually took their inventory just to see what it would predict, what we would do, and we didn't find it entirely accurate, but it was very interesting because you began to see what kind of traits they were looking for, if you will. I think several of us, Bob and we both ended up as an industrial designer. Well, that sounds off on the one hand, and then on the other hand, well, that is somewhat what we're doing, you know. You could do it. So I think this is an area of really considerable interest, and you may want to look at your local universities and colleges and see if they're doing anything like that, because I know as I've been talking to people around the country, I keep on finding interesting examples in strange places, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just wouldn't have expected some of them, and then they pop up and they tell me about these amazing things they're doing. So, and we'll get back to this afternoon too. How Paula or somebody from the school, tell us a little bit about what you're discussing.
Charlie wrote.
Yeah, I wrote it down. So I guess the answer for it, not at all. So we talked about our outcome being sort of graduating college career ready, and thinking about some kind of ways to like think about some lagging indicators that we can look at to see, to measure whether or not students are college career ready, that aren't maybe waiting 6 years for a graduation rate, because that makes it, you can learn a lot about studying like the 6-year graduation rate for your high schools, but things move slowly in K-12, but maybe not that slowly. So trying to think about some things like maybe 1 or 2 years out that we can start to look at. And two things that we've started to think a lot about are, for students who go to a 4-year school, how many are persisting into the second year? This seems like that's a pretty good signal. If you persist into a second year before your school, that you're gonna graduate. And then for the, and that's great that the NSC data gives us the ability to like figure that out, right? How many kids are persisting into a second year. And then also for students who go to a 2-year school, those students who are taking non-credit bearing courses, right? Remedial courses. Developmental courses, basic skills, I think they call them in the California community college system. And it's a little more difficult to track to the point that somebody else made recently. Sometimes there are exams that can function as a proxy here, like you take an exam in like AccuPlacer or something. And then there's also, one of the things that we're starting to do is have relationships with individual community college districts. Very difficult to set up. I think that in a nonprofit, if you're a nonprofit sort of brokering this, there can be a lot of like expensive legal like finagling to get these set up. So there's definitely, it's doable, but it's very difficult and it takes a lot of relationship building and a lot of like sort of detailed data sharing work to kind of do. But I think it's useful. Obviously it's useful, but really good to start to get some of that course data back so that you can sort of look at these things. So that's kind of like the outcome, right? That we thought about a little bit. One thing that we talked a lot about, kind of going back then into high school, making sure that the course sequence is rigorous, which is like a difficult thing to look at. There's ways that you can maybe look at the achievement, the prior achievement of the students based on their test scores in the courses that they're in. Different ways or sort of markers in the courses, like is it AP, is it dual enrollment? What are the sort of ways that we can think about rigor? And then one of the things that I think we were doing was identifying like who you need like to do some of these things, So I think it's important to sort of be thinking about like partnerships with research groups to think about how you measure rigor. Then kind of going back, thinking about that transition into 9th grade that we mentioned over here, passing algebra was something we thought about, these kind of gatekeeper courses, and kind of getting that information as quickly as possible, right? Like how can I get like Q1 progress report in algebra, like how can we get that information right away? Because we know that kids, like that 9th grade transition is where we lose a lot of students. And that those sort of becomes apparent that the student might need extra supports. And so figuring that out. And then, thinking about even in 8th grade, how can we see which students are graduating high school ready? In the core districts, we look at 96% attendance, 0 suspensions, and 3.0 GPA with no D's or F's. We say that that's high school ready. And we find that it's the case that of the students who meet those criteria, it's like sends a very strong signal that the student is going to graduate. So looking at that, and then all the way back, thinking about 3rd grade reading. Some other things. So that's kind of like our sort of like flow back. So I guess maybe not zero organization. Another thing that we talked a little bit about is collecting work-based learning data. There's kind of a whole continuum of work-based learning from awareness to exploration, development, and implementation, right? So it's different if you're just saying like, there's something called a job and you should get one versus like doing an internship versus actually credentialing or certification. other, you know, and I think that partnering with industry is interesting. So, Rich, did you mention something about LinkedIn study, doing a study with LinkedIn data?
Not a study, but just using you know how there's different versions of LinkedIn, there's like for you, and then if you're like an employer, using the employer one to do like a reverse analysis.
Yeah.
Looking at certain industries or certain companies and looking at their composition of graduates from which institutions.
Yeah, I think that is super interesting, like ways to think about, like creative ways to think about partnering with folks in industry, either formally or through some organization like that. And then also, you know, thinking about even going back further, thinking about adverse childhood events or SEL culture climate surveys. And then the last thing that we talked a little bit about was similar to Group 1 was some college access pieces, right? And how we think about not just like, are you, like there's one piece that's like, are you ready for college? Like, are you set up for success? There's another piece that's like, have you checked all the boxes? And I think that both of those are really important to be looking at. And kind of, you know, separating them out because they're very different problems. Well, maybe not very different problems, but there are certain things that, you know, might be a little bit lower hanging fruit in some of the college access stuff. So thinking about things like FAFSA completion, you know, applications, looking at nuts and ways to help fight that. That's about it. Anything else I missed from my group?
I was actually working with.
Yeah, I think all of you did a wonderful job. And really, I think these conversations, as I mentioned, lay the foundation for what we'll talk about afterwards, which is coming up in about half an hour. And before we get to lunch, what we wanted to do is talk about the how-tos. We are beginning to develop a suite of materials so that we can keep some of these ideas to other schools and districts in a year or so. And I think Anne may have some sheets about that, and Amanda and Charlene. We've got two things for you. One is a sample of how-to. And we want feedback on it. Is it useful? Is it the kind of thing that would be useful for other people? The other is a list here of the how-tos that we have thought about. We'd like feedback on that also. Are there, given all your conversation here and in the past, are there other things you would add that the school or district might find it helpful? Just have a one-page or two-page one. Do this, do that. So for the next 20 minutes or so, why don't you work, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, work in your groups, your existing groups, and look at one of the how-tos and look at that list of potential how-tos. And then we'll have some report out.